This is Jay.
Okay. Yeah, hi Jaigar, good morning, good evening. Hello?
Hi. Hi Prakash garu.
Yes, good evening, sir.
Good. Yeah. Hi Shamil.
అది మీ ఆర్గనైజర్ ఇక్కడ చూడండి సరే మీరు.
Yeah, I got it. Just వచ్చిందండి.
Yeah, good morning and good evening.
Yeah. షామిల్ గారు నేను అసలు అది డేటా సర్వీస్ లోకి ఎలా లాగిన్ కావాలో తెలియట్లేదు, ఒకసారి చూస్తారు అది. ఐ మీన్ నేను డిపాజిటర్ క్రియేట్ చేసే క్లాస్ అటెండ్ కాలేదు.
నేను మీకు ఒక డాక్యుమెంట్ పంపిస్తాను, మీరు దాంట్లో స్క్రీన్ షాట్స్ ప్రిపేర్ చేసేసుకోవచ్చు.
ఓకే. యా, ఎస్టర్డే నేను అదే ప్రకాష్ గారు ట్రై చేసాము, కొంచెం కుదరలేదు.
నాకు ఒకసారి మీ ఐడి చెప్తారా, నేను పంపిస్తాను. అదే మీ దాంట్లోకి లాగిన్ అయ్యి చూస్తున్నాను.
ఇప్పుడు మీరు లాగిన్ అయ్యేది ఈయన రామ్ లాగిన్ అని అనుకుంటా.
పర్సనల్ ఐడి, ఈమెయిల్ ఐడి మీరు అడిగేది ఈ మెయిల్ లాగిన్?
మీరు మామూలుగా మీ ఈమెయిల్ ఐడి చెప్పండి. మీరు ఈమెయిల్ ఐడి ఇస్తే నేను దానికి ఒక డాక్యుమెంట్ పంపిస్తాను, సో దాంతో మీరు చూసి లాగిన్ అయిపోవచ్చు.
ఓకే. ప్రకాష్ గారు పంపించాను.
ప్రకాష్
లేకపోతే నాకు పంపించేసాను మీరు.
నేను పంపిస్తాను. ఓకే, రైట్.
నాకు పంపిస్తే నేను అందరినీ పంపిస్తా. వేణుగోపాల్,
I think I sent my email ID.
Right. Okay.
Now I have a question on yesterday class.
Okay.
Yesterday we created a global variables, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is the use of it? We are just passing the parameters, not dynamically, statistically. We are entering into there, we are passing. If you want to pass the parameters dynamically, how to do that? And another second question is there any way, conditionally we are executing the program, right? This is, yesterday we executed 3 separate data sets. Suppose we are pulling the data from 3 different sources. There, I want to create a dependency. If any job is fails or something, I need to stop that and there I'll wait for some time. Like in that way, if I want to create, how to do that by using all these parameters.
Yeah, we can do that, and we'll be looking at those things a little later.
Oh, okay. Then it is good.
We'll be looking at that because I was telling you about the example of delta, so we'll be looking at that. So I sent you that mail.
Let me check it. And what is that delta?
So delta means if you are see, there are 2 types of loads. One is the load that you are normally doing, and the second one is you started a project, you extracted the data from the source system, and once you extracted the data and finally you loaded that data into the target system. At the time of extraction, they will say that this is the cutover date. The word cutover date comes there. So means from the beginning till 31st December 2012, you have to extract the data and load it into the target system. So 31st December 2012 will become the cutover date. And once you do the load, so even then after 31st 12/2012, few transactions happen on the source systems. So you want to extract the data from the source and again load the data into the target system for the rest of the transactions that happen after 31st 12/2012. So if you do an extraction, again the whole chunk of data will come into the system. So instead of doing the entire extraction, you will do the delta extraction. So that is called the word delta. Delta means you do an initial load, and after the initial load, if some data is present in the source system, that is called the delta load.
Incremental.
It is not exactly incremental, but it is something like
Kind of.
Yeah, the remaining data. See, you are trying to empty a bucket of water, and at the end you realize that there are some more water left. So once you pour the entire water down, you are trying to put even the last few drops into on the floor. So that is called, the last thing that you are trying to do is called the delta.
You mean to say the remaining the rest of the transactions,
Yeah,
whatever
exactly.
that is happened which is happened like after 31st of that particular month cutover date, that is those when transactions like falls under the new date or like old, the previous the data which we are pulling. Suppose we are pulling for December, right? The transaction happened on after 12 a.m.
Yeah, that will be the new date, new records, right? Because when you are scheduling the jobs on 31st/12/2012, so you will be extracting the entire data from that day, and after that, if some systems are doing some transactions on them, and you want to load only those newly created transactions, the new records or the change records from source to the target, these new records or the changer records are called the delta records.
But the date will change, right? The
Yeah,
transaction
definitely.
date, the transaction date will change. So in that case, we will load those remaining, transaction the later next month.
Yeah, exactly. That is
Next
how
load.
it happens. The deltas happens on the timestamps.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, we will look into the more detailed examples of that a little later.
Okay, it's fine. I mean, real-time scenario examples.
Okay, so yeah, there are quite a good scenarios which address your questions that you are asking. The scenarios like the scenarios like what you have to do when you are having the delta records and the full records, and what you have to do, how you have to reuse. So yesterday when I was telling about the reusability, I was telling that this is how we have to reuse the same data or the same data flow again in the jobs with the delta settings. Okay, so that enables you, instead of recreating the same job again and again, that allows you to do a normal extraction, which is called an initial load, and also the delta extraction using the same data flow. All right, so what I will do is I'll put all of you on mute, and we will continue with today's concept, central repository. So if any one of you have questions, do let me know before we start the central repository. All right, so I'm putting all of you on mute. So if you have any questions, please ping or unmute yourselves. All right, so welcome to the concept of central repository. So central repository itself, it says that it is a central storage location. For example, let us take a small graphical representation here. So we have 4 users, user 1, user 2, user 3, and user 4. Let us assume that user 1 is Venugopal, user 2 is Prakash, user 3 is Rishabh, and user 4 is Ram. And these 4 guys wants to log into a particular, they log into their own local repository and start working on the project. So everybody logs into their own local repository and designs the project. Now, for example, let us take that Ram has completed his finance module, Prakash has completed his sales and distribution module, and Rishabh has completed his material master module, and Gopal has completed his customer master module. So now everybody has completed their work. Where do we consolidate that? Where do we apply the final code of the consolidation? So once they are done, they need a common place where they can upload their code and where they can send their code to consolidate. So that is the central repository concept. So once we complete our code, we need a common share for all the users to upload their code, or a common storage place for them. So it should always allow them to download the code as well, not just upload but also to download. The reason, because if people are working in an off-site and on-site mode, so there will be two different time zones. People who are working in India will be in Indian time zone, and who are working in US will be in US time zone. To allow the work to continue 24/7, so it will be possible if these people in US does an extraction part and upload that code into the central repository, where the remaining users download that code from the central repository and build a transformation on top of that. So you should be able to upload, you should be able to download from the central repository. And there are a few more problems, like if everybody has a complete access on central repository, then they can delete the code. So if let us assume that user A has developed that code, and by mistake user D also developed the same code but with some errors. So if by some mistake, if user D uploads the same code into the central repository, the code created by the user A will be overwritten, and we will actually lose the actual job. So in order to handle these things, in order to have these jobs safe, secure, so we need some securities on the central repository. So we'll be looking at central repository, secure and non-secure central repository, and also how do we create users and user groups within the central repository, how do we distribute the authentications on the central repository. So this is core administrative task, but also the developers needs to know about the central repository, because we will be doing the code check-in and check-outs into the central repository. So we'll look in more detail of this now. This is just an overview. So again, there are two types of projects. So the one that you are seeing here is a multi-user instance where multiple users are present in a project. So this could be a big project, because the current project that I'm working in has 80 developers, 80, and it is a pretty big project, and there are 80 local repositories, and central repository, 80 users are connected to the same central repository. So this is one way. And if you are working on a small project, and if you are working on a very small project, like you just need only one user to complete the project, then you work on a single user instance environment. So that is what we will be looking at, a single user instance and multi-user instance environment today. Central repository concepts, and what is a single user environment and what is a multi-user environment. So first let us look at the single user environment. Alright, so a single user who connects to the central repository. So why do we need a central repository when we have a single user? Because he is anyways a single user, and he has a local repository, and he has all the codes within his local repository. So why do we need a single user instance when we are working in a environment like this? So why do we need something like this? Because the reason is, this user who is creating the code will anyway save it in the local repository, but this guy will also create some test codes or sample codes which he don't want to be uploaded into the final central repository. So for that reason, what he will do is he'll eliminate whatever he want to from his local repository, and he will upload that into the central repository. So again, for a common place where he can upload the final piece of code, he needs a central repository. So these are the two scenarios that we'll be working with today, single user instance and multi-user instance. So let us go through the steps. Okay, so the simple steps, one is like you create a database. Okay, because for local repository it is very simple as the way you create your local repository. The only difference is you will not create a job server, because you will never execute any job from the central repository, or you will not be allowed to execute, or you cannot execute any jobs from the central repository. You can execute your jobs only from the local repository. Okay, so remaining everything is same. So apart from adding this one, the job server, it remains the same. So first one is create the database. Second one is create central repository using repo manager, repository manager. Third one is register the repository in the management console. Fourth step is to create the job server. We will not do that, so we'll skip that fourth step. And fifth step is register or configure the central repo in the designer. Okay, so this is the first step that we'll be looking at: creating a database, creating a central repository using repository manager, registering the repository in the management console, register or configure the central repository in the designer. And apart from that, we'll be looking at concepts like secure, non-secure, and secure central repository. So what is a non-secure central repository and what is a secure central repository? And we will see the differences, what will happen once we create a non-secure central repository and upgrade that to central repository. Or you can call this as upgrading the non-secure central repo to secure central repo. Okay, this is one of the most important thing, and trust me, if you talk about this in the interviews, you'll definitely make it out, because people does not know all these concepts outside, because they are very hardly allowed for the people at very high level, because people on the low levels, like with 2-3 years experience, they're not allowed to touch any of these concepts. So they will never know unless and until they work on the tool for 4 to 5 years. But I just want you to be aware of each and every role that we can possibly do within the data services. So I'm letting you know this. So this is one of the most important thing, and trust me, if you talk about these things in your workplace or in your interviews, you'll definitely make a difference from the rest of the crowd who are also working on data services. So let us go and do these steps. First step is to create a database. So for that, you have to go to the SQL Server Management Studio. The navigation is Start, All Programs 2000 Server, SQL Server 2008 R2, and go to the Management Studio. It is already open on my system. So for that, I have to create a repository, a database on which I'm going to create a repository. So db_central_user1. So our local repository is db_user1. So I'll create a database, is new database. Select the database, right click and go for a new database and call it as db_central_user1. Okay, just give the database name and press enter. Right here, database will be added at the bottom. Alright, so your DB Central User 1 is available here. On top of that, what is the second step that you need to do? You have to build a repository using the repository manager. So let us go to the repository manager navigation now. Navigation is Start, All Programs, Business Objects XI 3.2, Data Services, and Repository Manager. I repeat, Start, All Programs, Business Objects XI 3.2, Data Services, and Repository Manager. So click on the Repository Manager, and now you have already seen the screen. This is what we created when we created the local repositories, the same screen. But next, now you have to choose the repository type as central, because we are going to create the central repository. So you have to notice one difference. When I select local, the security enabling is not done, it is grayed out. But when I select central, the enable security checkbox is activated. So we will see what is a secure central repository a little later. So as of now, let us create a central repository first. Now take the server name. You have to view these credentials here. So take the server name from SQL Server and the database name that you just created, db central underscore user1, and the username and password. Okay, remember one thing, just do not jump and click on create. First click on get version, because I told you the reason why. It should give you a message saying that the database exists but the repositories are not valid, because if your databases are already utilized by some other repositories, when you just go and click on create, they will drop and recreate the repositories. To avoid such kind of instances, we always go for clicking on get version first and see the message, and then go for click on create, and this will create a central repository. Okay, so if you look at this diagram that I just drew, okay, so now it is creating a central repository, and we just first created a database, and on that database we created a central repository, so that whatever you upload into the central repository will be saved within that database. And also the database will have all the repository information. So it is adding all the address regulatory cleansings, user-defined transformations, global geocoded transformations. So we should get this message saying that the central repository was created successfully. So we have a question here. Can there be only one central repository at one time? Yeah. You can activate only one central repository in your designer. That's a good question, Rishabh. So once you add this, yeah, we'll be coming to that point again. So once we add this central repository in the fourth step, okay, register or configure the central repository in the designer. We can do that. We can do more than one central repository at a time, but only one central repository will be activated. You cannot have more than one central repository activated at a time. Only one central repository. Now you should get this message saying that the central repository was created successfully. Now again click on get version. It says that a non-secure central repository is created. So it says that non-secure central repository is created. So we will look at that secure part once again. So just minimize this one. As of now, we are done creating the repository. You can close this. Now the second step is go to the management console and register this secure central repository there. Well, not the central repository that you have created. But now it will throw an error saying that you cannot register the repository because unless and until your repository is a secure repository, you cannot add it to the management console. So if I am trying to add the same thing now, it will throw an error saying that, one second, it will throw an error saying that it cannot be added because of the non-secure central repository. Okay, I'm trying to show that error to you. Okay, successfully connected to the repository when I test, but when I click on apply, it says that you cannot add a non-secure central repository to the administrator. So the central repository to be added to the administrator should always be a secure central repository. So the step number 3, we'll do that a little later. Okay, now go to the fourth step and configure the central repository into your designer. Okay, now we will log in into the BODS designer using the local repository credentials, and once we log into the designer, whatever the code that we have created earlier, we will upload that code into the central repository once we configure or register the central repository within the designer. Means we are establishing a connection between the central repository and the designer. So we'll be doing that now. Go to the designer. Okay, I just logged in. The navigation is Start, All Programs, Business Objects, XI 3.2, Data Services, and Designer. So once we log into this one, so what we need to do is go to Tools, go to Central Repositories. So this is the navigation, Tools, Central Repositories, and you have to add the central repository here. So give any name, central underscore repo, then the database server name, the database name is db underscore central, and the database server name, you have to copy it from here. If, one more thing, if your database server and the BODS both are installed locally on your system, so here in the place of this server, we can type localhost. So this will also work. So, but for this, your backend database server and the BODS should be installed on the same machine, and you can give the username and password. And again, here there is one secure checkbox which we'll look a little later. So I'm just clicking on OK. Now the central repository has added. Now I'm activating that. If I'm if I want to do some changes on the central repository, I need to first deactivate that. Okay, and then select the central repository and click on edit, and I do some changes. Now if you see secure, you see it as no. So it says that it is a non-secure central repository that is created on your system. So now let us go ahead and see the differences. So now your central repository is added. So now it has to be activated. Select it and activate. And now if you see, this button was grayed out till now, which is active on your system. So this is your local repository, which has a book and a star mark on top of that. And next to that is your central repository. It is also called as central object library, because local object library, local repository is called as LOL, local object library, and this is called as COL, which is central object library. So if you click on this central repository, it will open, and it just looks like your local repository. So if you look at the projects tab, you have the projects tab, jobs, workflows, data flows, transformations, data stores, file formats, and custom functions. You can see the same things present in your local repository, because the reason why we have a central repository is to upload all the code that we have from the local systems to the central system. So that is the concept. So now, how do I add my code into the central repository, right? So as of now, everything is empty. So how do I add my code? So the way in which you can add your code is select your code under your local object library. You cannot do it from the project area. Project area is for designing and executing the code. So if you right click on this, you get only these options. But if you go to the local object library, select your data store, select your job, right click and check for the option, you get add to central repository. Okay. So add to central repository, you get objects, dependents, objects and dependents, objects and with filtering. So why 3 options? Why do we need 3 options here? So before we add a job into the central repository, let me narrate to you what exactly happens in a project. So once, excuse me, once in the initial days of the projects, when the architects and the team leads and the system administrators, they go and have discussions with the client. So they make them sign a non-data disclosure agreement, or it is called as a conduct certificate. We need to sign, scan and send it back to the client saying that we will not disclose the data at the time of project anywhere outside, and we will keep it secure, and if the data is leaked, then we will take the responsibility. So in some with some clients, when the information is pretty severe to them, so you have to sign these agreements, and once they sign these agreements, these architects or the system administrators will be provided with a new user ID and password to their source databases or the client source systems. So what they do, once they get these databases access, so they will create a data store from their BODS designer. They will create a source data store and a target data store. So they do all the configurations here. So they give all the passwords, usernames, target system, source system, target system. They give all the configurations. Now what they will do is, the client says that he don't want to disclose the username and password to all the remaining users. And the second reason why they don't disclose is, if somebody tries with the wrong password, he might end up locking the access and nobody can get an access for the entire day, or at least unless the administrator comes and unlocks that thing. So to avoid such kind of situations, the usernames and passwords are not disclosed to the team, and the administrator creates his own local repository, creates his own data stores in his local repository. Now the administrator has to provide the access to the local developers. If not, they cannot work on the project. So what he will do is, he will create the data stores and he will add them to the central repository so that the remaining users can also access the same. Okay, he is uploading them to the central repository. User 1, 2, 3, 4 will connect to the central repository and download those data stores, so that now they don't know the password or anything, but still they have an access. So why do we have these three concepts like objects, objects and dependents with filtering? So object means, if you look at the data store, only the data store, just this screen where you have the configurations button available. So objects and dependents means the data store along with the tables. So this is objects and dependents. Objects and dependents with filtering is, it allows us to add the data store into the central repository with a provision that we can choose if this thing can be created or exempted when we are adding that to the central repository. So for the three data stores, we'll see the three options. First, SAP data store. I'm just adding to the central repository only the object. Okay, so once you add the code to the central repository, you have to create a comment saying that you have to give some comments like this: who is the author of this particular code and why he is trying to load this into the central repository. So I say that the author is Samuel and this is an initial node. So click on OK and it says that the object is added successfully. And if you look at this now, your data store is added, but none of the tables from your local repository are pushed into the central repository, because we just added only the data store, only the object. We added to the central repository only the object. We did not add the dependents. So if you look at this one here, it has dependents as well. So all these three tables are present which are not added to the central repository. So the second one, what we will see is, add to the central repository with objects and dependents. So if I click on this, I give a comment saying that author is Samuel and it is the initial node, and just click on apply all. So if you see, when you are doing just add to the central repository only with the object, you don't get apply to all, but because you are only adding the data store to the central repository. But now when you are saying objects and dependents, so all the remaining tables will also be present. So instead of clicking OK to all, you apply this command to all the tables of the central repository. Now if you see, you have the tables as well added to the central repository. But earlier, no tables were added, only the data store is added. Third one, we will see add to the central repository with filtering. Right? So now it is a little different screen. So version control confirmation. So it will show you which data store it wants to add, and it gives you an option whether you can exclude or create this data store. So I select create. Now next one is the tables. So it gives all the tables. So let us assume that I don't want to create this table. So I exclude that and create all the remaining tables. So click on next and finish and give a comment saying that author Samuel added with filter. Apply to all. Now the third data store is as well added, but if you see that target 1234 is not present in the third data store, but if you see in the local repository, you have got that table target customer 1234. So these are the three differences when you add a job to a central repository. Add the job with only the object, add with objects and dependents, and add with filtering. So now let us add the jobs. We just added the data stores. So what the administrators do is they add these data stores into the central repository so that all the remaining users can download these data stores and configure them in their system, and they can also have an access to the source and target systems. So now the second quick question that you should be getting is, when somebody writes these data stores back to the central repository with some wrong credentials, what will happen? Well, let us assume that user 1 who knows somebody in the client side, some friend of his own, so he took his username and password and tried to connect to the source system. It was working in day 1, but the administrator realized that this guy is doing a malpractice and he locks his password, but now this user 1 does not have the existing password or the news ID from which he got his from friend is not working. So what he will do? His data store is nullified. So again, if he uploads the same data store into the central repository, so now definitely the data store that is in the central repository will be overwritten with the wrong password. So how do you protect that? So that is the second question. You can do a checkout on the objects and dependents okay, on the data store, only on the data store level, so that it says that this particular data store is locked by this user and no one is allowed to overwrite this particular data store. So once they upload the code into the central repository, in order to prevent the code from somebody overwriting it, we do a checkout on this one. Okay, I repeat, select the job or data store, right click and do a checkout with objects and dependents if you want the entire job to be protected, or if it is just a data store and you don't want somebody to overwrite the data store credentials, you can do a checkout with only the object. And once the entire project is done, how to release this? The quick third question, undo checkout with the objects. Okay, so these are the different options that you see. So there are so many options in the central repository. So first one is we saw how to add objects and dependents and with filtering. Then once you add, how to prevent it from being overwritten. So you just need to do a checkout with objects and dependents without replacement. So I will tell you what are these options a little later when we go to them. Now let us add a job into the central repository. So now as you see, the entire jobs part is empty. So right click, add job to the central repository. Now if I just give only the object, only the job name will be added to the central repository. So definitely I have to go for objects and dependents because there are so many tables and data flows within the job. Now if you see, it says that these data stores and these tables are already a part of your central repository. So the following objects cannot be added to the central repository because it is already there. So it will do an initial check so that it will not overwrite. Okay, so you just click on continue. Author Samuel, click on apply to all, and now you see the job is present here. Okay, the job is present here, and you can download this you can first configure the central repository from a different user, and you can download that, which we'll be looking at a little later stage. So now we know how to add the code into the central repository. Downloading, we will log into some other repository and we will configure this one, and we will see how we can download the codes. Okay, so apart from that, adding to the central repository, we have to see that we have to do a checkout just in case if we are afraid that somebody is going to override our job. So that is one thing, and if one job is already added to the central repository, you cannot do any change. You cannot do anything from the local repository because add to the central repository is grayed out. So my next question, if there is a change request on the job, they're asking that they asked you to do some changes on the job, and they want to add one more table to the job. So how are you going to handle this? Because once you add the job into the central repository, you don't get any more options like, okay, do some more changes on the job and go and add it in the central repository. But now once it is added, it is completely grayed out. So how are you going to handle this? So the option that we have here is, first you need to do a checkout with objects and dependents without replacement. So check out only the object, just in case if only the job name should be checked out. Objects without replacement, okay, means only the job without replacement. What we'll do when you do a checkout means this job that is present in your central repository is copied back to the local repository, and it overrides whatever the code that is present in the local repository with the content that is present in the central repository. So when you do a checkout, it is like you are establishing a connection between your local and the central repository, and you are pulling some code from the central repository to the local repository. Okay, so if you have an older version of the code in the central repository and you have a latest version of the code in the local repository, if you do a checkout with objects and dependents, it will replace the code in your local repository. So you should always go for objects and dependents without replacement. Even dependents will count the data flows, data stores, and tables within the job. So when you do a checkout, first you need to do objects and dependents without replacement. Now if you see a check mark is present in this job, on this job in the central repository, and it says that the checkout repository is db_user1, which is our local repository. So if you expand the jobs, you can also see a check mark on the job here. Now what we need to do, we need to go to job. Let me put it on the right hand side and just unpin this one. Right? So you need to go to the job and do the changes as they are required. Okay, so for example, they want to add some few more fields here. Okay, and similarly in the next one they want to add some more fields. So this is an enhancement. So this is called a change request in the jobs. So guys, remember the terminologies when we use them. So these are called change requests. When once you complete the job and once you are done with the job, and again the functional guys ask you to do some changes or add some fields, or the data owners wants to see some extra data, these are called the change requests. So you can say that you worked on the change requests after the job development, which is something like a support that you provide for the jobs. So now click on Save All. Okay, now I added some fields in my local repository to the job, and what I need to do is I saved it, and now I go to the central repository and I do a check-in with objects and dependents so that the newly added fields will be registered back into the central repository. Alright, so this is how we do changes on the local repository once the code is already added to the central repository. For example, the example that we have seen now, this code is already added to the central repository, and if there is a change request on this code saying that they want to see some 2 extra fields of data, so first what we need to do is like go to the central repository, do a checkout with objects and dependents without replacement. So I told you only the object, only the job will be locked so that nobody will override the same job name. Objects without replacement is it will be locked, and as well what it will do is like it will copy the content from the central repository. So that is the reason why we have something like without replacement. So it will lock both the object in the local repository as well as the object in the central repository, but it will not overwrite the code in the local repository from the code in the central repository. So that is the reason why we have without replacement. Then objects and dependents, job and the dependent data flows, workflows and all these things will be overwritten from the central repository if you do a checkout with objects and dependents. Objects and dependents without replacement. So sorry, what it will do is it will do a checkout, it will establish a connection between the local and the central repository, but it will not overwrite the code that is present in your local repository. And with filtering is you can choose which part of the code you want it to be locked and which part of the code you want it to be unlocked. So you can do these things. So once you do it, object and dependence without replacement, you can see a check mark here and also a check mark within your local object library, which says that this particular job is locked by the central repository. Now go to the job, do whatever the changes, add some extra tables, extra fields as per the requirement, and once you are done, go to the central repository, right click, check in, and objects and dependents. Right now you'll add all the changes that you have done in your local repository to the central repository. So that is one good option that we have. And the second option is we have seen checkout, check-in, and just in case if I just lock it for some reason and I don't want somebody to override this, and later how do I do that? Undo checkout. So I have an option called undo checkout so that I can lock my job in the central repository and I can unlock that. So we have one more question: can more than one person check out the code from the central repository? Yeah, Rishabh, that is the concept. That is the only possible option. That is the reason why we have a central repository. If 4 or 5 users are there, they can individually check out their codes from the central repository, but they cannot do a checkout on one code, because if user 1 is checking out this job underscore condition underscore scripts and global variables from the central repository, it will not be accessible for any other users like user 2, 3 and 4. So they cannot do anything on this because it is completely locked by the user 1. Okay, so it is providing you a common storage area where you can apply a lock on a particular object. So it is like a locker facility to provided to each and every user within the central object library, so that he can either put it in an open place or he can put it in a locker which will be visible for the remaining users, but remaining users cannot do anything. So if there are 4 jobs and 4 users want to check out or check in their own job, they can do that parallelly, but they cannot check out or check in only one job parallelly. I mean, they cannot check out one job. All the 4 users cannot check out one job at the same time. Okay, Rishabh, I think, is the question clear to you? Rishabh, did I? Yeah, okay, thank you. So now, the second option that we have is get latest version, get by label, get latest version of the code. So, for example, what I did is, by some mistake, I deleted this job from the central local repository. Okay, so why this delete option is not active? Okay, so let me take one job here. Okay, so let me take this job and add this to the central repository first. Flat file to flat file extraction. Yeah, the objects and dependents apply to all. And now, by some mistake, I have deleted this job. Okay, so I deleted the data flow, df underscore ff underscore ff underscore ext. Alright, delete this one. Now you get into mark saying that there is no data flow available, and I deleted. Why it is not allowing me to delete this one? Yeah. Okay, yeah, let me delete from here, from job list. Alright, so I deleted this job. Now, by mistake, I deleted the entire stuff from the local repository. Now, I want to take a backup of that code from the central repository, or I want to copy it. Because the reason why you have a central repository is the local repositories can sometimes turn volatile. So they can crash at any time. So every day, once you complete your work, you will be taking a backup of that code into the central repository, and from there a regular backup of the entire code is taken by the system administrator. So even they cannot depend, they cannot depend on the central repository. What if he promises that the central repository is taken care by the administrator, and what if the central repository crashed down? So they generally take an entire backup of the jobs into as a backup into some other repository or some other ATL files. They take a backup of that one. But now in this scenarios, by mistake, if I delete this, what I will do is I'll go to the central repository, select the job, right click, and get latest version of the code. So again, if I select object, only the job name will come, objects and dependents, the job with the data flows, workflows, table names, and all these things will come. With filtering, I can choose the flat files that I want to replace, or it says if the flat file is already available, it says to replace or exclude. So you can replace or exclude. If the table is data flow is not present, it will either ask you to create or exclude. So that there is a difference: replace and exclude, create and exclude. So you can do that, or you can just right click, go for latest to get latest version, objects and dependents. Now you see your job is added. And if you see, the data flow is also added, and all the tables and all these things are present. So you can get the latest version of the code from the central repository as well. The next option that you have is label a latest version. So why do we need labeling into the central repository? Alright, so as I told you earlier, there was a change request on the job. You first added the code into the central repository. As soon as you add the code into the central repository, label that code saying that this is version 1. Okay, version 1 of the code. And after that, they give some changes on the job, and you apply the changes on the job. Again, you do a checkout and check-in and add the code into the central repository. Label the job saying that that is version 2. Now the functional consultants realize that the logic they gave in the version 2 is completely wrong, and that is creating a very bad data. So they want to revert back to the version 1. Okay, so you don't have the version 1 because you already written the code that is present in your system, and you uploaded that even into the central repository. So now what do? So you go to the central repository, right click, get by label, objects and dependents, and you give version 1. The version 1 of the code is copied back into the central local repository. So BODS allows you to create versions of the codes in the central repository. So I repeat, you can label the versions like before CR, after CR, or before the code change, after the code change. So you can do any labeling here, but when you try to get the code by label, you have to give whatever the label that you have given here, you have to give the same label of the code. And to see how many labels are there and all those things, you can see show history of the job, and we have added these things. So if you give any comments when you are doing a label, the comments will be present here. And this is version 1, version 2 of the code, same code. So this is the first one. When I created this one, it was just created onto the system on so and so date and so time. And after that, 7:52 a.m. I created version 1, and 7:52:45 a.m. I created a version 2. So the first one we added history, so comments. So if you look at this one, it says that author is Samuel. Then I did a check-in and check-out on the job. So it tells me what date it is modified, what does I do, and all these things. It gives you a complete history about this job. Now this is history, and you can also see, okay, if I select this jobs, so it says that get object by version. So which version of the code is the latest one, and which one you want, you can do that one as well. But if I go to this job and go to the history, since I added the labels, so it says me get object by label and get object by version. It can give you an option, either you want to choose the code by a label like which you added v1 v2, or by the version which you added into the system, the first version, the second version, or the third version, whichever the version that you want to get from the central repository, you can get that. So these are the different options. Next, using get an option, because this is a non-secure central repository, anybody can delete jobs from the central repository. So you have a delete option. I can delete the job directly. Yes, it's gone. So this is one more thing. So what you can do to avoid such things, because for example, let us assume that the team lead who is designed a code and added it into the central repository, and let me assume that this is in a very sarcastic way, this thing really not happen. Let me assume that I got a fight with my team lead, I got a fight with my project manager, or some of my team members had fought with me, and they just go into the central repository and they can delete the code, and they do something bad on the local repository and they crash my database. So what happened to my code? I don't have anything. So we have to do something to stop such activities. So we have to create authorizations and restrictions which will allow us to control the access or limit the access to the different users, which is the concept of secure and central secure, non-secure repository. Okay, so right, so this is like a delete option which will be active when you are an admin, and which will be deactivated when you are a user, which we will see a little later. So now do a comparison between object to local. So what it will do, the same object is compared with the local repository. So this is the one in the local central repository, and this is one in the local repository. It gives you a graphical comparison between each and everything, the data types and all the values you can see everywhere. If you have a script, you can click on the magnifying glass next to that, and it says this is the script, and if there are any changes, it will give them in the color blue. If there are any deletions, it gives you in the color red. If something is inserted, new one, it gives in the color green, and consolidate, and the differences it will show here. So if you want to compare the code that is present in the central repository and the local repository, you can do that. So object with dependence to the local repository, so it will check all dependents as well, and also you can check with some cross repositories. So if it is an administrator, he can log in to some other repository and he can do a comparison with the code that is present in the central repository and some other repository as well, to understand what are the differences between the code. Because when we are working in huge projects like the one that I am working on right now, so this is one of the world's biggest migration project, and there cannot be a system consistency when you are working on the code, because yesterday I was doing a quality check on the code, and some user has uploaded his job into the central repository where there are some mistakes, and I gave some reviews on top of that and asked that guy to do the changes, and he sent me a mail after 2 hours saying that he has done the changes and uploaded the code into the central repository. But when I see the code, when I get the code from the central repository for a QA purpose, I see the changes are not reflected. So I asked him why. So he took me to his system and he showed his system that he has done those changes. So at sometimes the connections might be lost between the local and the central repository, and it will show that it has added successfully, but at times it might not be added. So what I did is I did a comparison between the central and his local repository, because for my system the connection is good and for his system the connection is lost. So it shows that, you know, nothing was reflecting, the changes that he made in his local repository were not reflecting on the central repository. So for that purpose, what I did is I did again a log off from his system and asked him to re-log in and again check in the code into the central repository, so that then the new code is added to the central repository. So we had to keep so many things in mind when we are working. You have to do a cross-check from the central repository first. So you add a code into the central repository. You have to get the latest version of the code into your local repository once again to ensure all the changes that you have done are properly reflecting in the central repository or not. If not, the earlier version of the code is still present in the central repository. So we'll do one thing. We will look at the secure central repository tomorrow, because till now we are looking at a single user instance, so what a single user do with the central repository. So we'll look at the multi-user instance, secure central repository, users, user groups, and authentications tomorrow. And that will take another 10 minutes, but if it's already time, I have to start to office. So any questions on today's class? Any questions about the central repository? I mean, if you understand the concept, that is good, because tomorrow, again, when we are discussing with the secure central repository, we'll be doing all the tasks that are common that we have done today. So I guess no questions, so just send me an email to pboard.dataservices if you have any questions on the central repository, so we can at the same time tomorrow. Else any changes in the schedule? Yeah, Gopal, that's the right question. Do you have a session tomorrow? You mentioned on Friday. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, tomorrow morning we will not have a session. Thanks for reminding that, because I'm traveling tonight and probably I'll reach by tomorrow at 7:30 or 8. So we will postpone the session for one day. That is tomorrow morning my time. Rishabh, I think it is Friday night for you. So Saturday morning my time is Friday night for you. So Friday night is an off for you, Rishabh, and people in US, it is an off for you. And Saturday morning, people in India have a rest, though there is no need for you to wake up early in the morning and sit in front of the laptops and listen to my voice. So enjoy the holiday. And again, I'll trouble you back on Sunday morning. That is Rishabh, and people in US, it is Saturday night for you. We'll have a class once again. So probably on Sunday we will have an extended session. Okay, so we will have an extended session, like we will take a 2-hour session on Sunday from probably 7 to 9. We will have a class, and we will be covering most important topics without a break, because see, today generally the design is like this particular topic has to be completed within a day, but giving some more explanations or making it more clear, so we just sometimes extend the schedule. And on Saturday or on Sunday morning, right, we will have an extended class at least for 1.5 hours or 1 hour, and we will try to complete the complete concepts, or we will try to cover the complete concepts on the day. And if you have any questions meanwhile, do send me email. And Ram, I think I sent you the document, so you can follow the screenshots in the document and you can log in, because the difference is the screen that is provided to you is like BODS version 4.
Okay.
4.0, so that is the reason why you see the difference. So I sent you the document which gives you a step-by-step analysis, like step-by-step approach, how you have to create users and log into the DS4 designer. So you can follow that one. Or if you want me to create, so probably by not today evening, maybe tomorrow morning my time, I can log into your system, create a local repository, and you can start using that.
Sure. Yep.
Okay, either way.
Yep,
So tomorrow morning, once I reach home, I'll log into your system and try to see if it is possible for, I will try to see if you have already created with the document that I gave, or you want me to create. So I will see, and then I will create a local repository for you